I stood in the kitchen, holding a store-bought cake I had bought myself. The "Congratulations on your retirement" text, written in shaky frosting, looked more like a joke than a celebration. The clock on the wall ticked past 6 p.m., the exact time my kids said they'd arrive. I had cleaned the house, put on my favorite dress, even cooked their favorite dishes. But the house was silent. No ringing doorbell. No laughter. Just me. And the candles on a cake I wasn't sure I even wanted to light. I kept glancing at my phone, certain I had missed a message. I hadn't. Nothing. Not even a text. Just 2 check marks next to the last message I sent in our group chat. So excited to see you all tonight. Seen. But ignored. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the first time I had been put on the back burner. Not the first time plans were forgotten, postponed, or written off with, "Sorry, Mom, work's been crazy." But this time stung the most. I had given 40 years of my life to teaching. I helped raise 3 children, supported their dreams, paid off their student loans, and babysat their kids whenever they needed. But when it came time for my celebration, they forgot. But what started as a painful night of disappointment turned into something far more empowering, because that night, after blowing out my own candles and scraping frosting off my sweater, I made a decision. If they didn't have time to celebrate my retirement, I'd celebrate it myself. Not with a party, not with a vacation, but with something bold. Something they'd never expect. I was going to start my own business, at 67, and not just any business, but one that would remind me every day that I still mattered. I didn't know then that this decision would not only shake my children, but the entire neighborhood. What began as a quiet act of defiance turned into something much bigger. By the way, if you made it this far into the story, thank you. Truly. Believe it or not, over 99% of people who watch these stories aren't subscribed. If you felt something while watching, even just for a moment, I'd be so grateful if you hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. By the way, if you made it this far into the story, thank you. Truly. Believe it or not, over 99% of people who watch these stories aren't subscribed. If you felt something while watching, even just for a moment, I'd be so grateful if you hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. My name is Linda Mayfield, and I've spent nearly my entire life in Salt Lake City, Utah. A small, quiet corner of the city tucked between the Wasatch Mountains and long stretches of neighborhood roads. The kind where neighbors wave even if they don't know your name. For 40 years, I was a high school English teacher. Not the kind of teacher who just handed out worksheets and called it a day. No, I loved my job. I ran after-school book clubs, stayed late grading essays, and gave students rides home when their parents forgot. I knew every kid's name and their favorite author by the second week of school. I believed in structure, in kindness, in the idea that if you give young people your full heart, they'll remember you for a lifetime. But it turned out that philosophy didn't always apply to your own children. I raised 3 kids, Jordan, Melissa, and Ryan, mostly on my own after my husband passed away from a sudden stroke in his early 50s. Back then, we had just finished paying off the house. We were planning a trip to Maine, just the 2 of us, when I got the call from the ER. Everything changed after that. I didn't have time to grieve the way people usually do. I had a full-time job and 3 teenagers staring at me every morning, hungry and confused. So I powered through. I didn't cry in front of them. I made dinners every night, helped them with homework, drove them to every sports game, science fair, dance recital, and when they left for college, I sold the second car, picked up summer school classes, and started watching neighborhood kids to help with tuition. I did it all without ever once asking them to pay me back. Because that's what a mother does. But somewhere along the line, I became invisible. Not all at once, not in a dramatic or cruel way. more like a slow fade. Phone calls every day turned into once a week, then once every few weeks. Then only when they needed something. Advice, a babysitter, help wiring money for something urgent. At first I didn't mind. I thought, they're just busy, they'll come around. But busy started sounding a lot like indifferent. I retired from teaching in the spring. My last class surprised me with a giant card signed by all 27 students, and the staff threw a small get-together in the teacher's lounge with bagels and balloons. It was sweet, modest, a quiet goodbye to a life I had built over 4 decades. But the real celebration, I thought, would come later, with family. My kids had all agreed to come by that Friday. We'll bring the grandkids. We'll make it. A whole thing, Melissa had said. I took that promise seriously. I bought streamers. I dusted every corner of the house. I made sure there was enough food for everyone, even gluten-free options for Ryan's wife. And then, nothing. Just a cold, hollow house filled with food that went uneaten. Silence where laughter should have been. A cake I bought myself, half melted, by the time I cut it alone. That was the night everything changed for me. I should mention, I'm not the type to throw pity parties. I may be soft-spoken, but I'm not weak. I wasn't angry at my children. I was tired. Tired of waiting for them to make me feel important. Tired of shrinking myself into a background character in their lives. So I stayed up late that night and opened my old laptop. I Googled starting a business after retirement. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a sign. Maybe just proof that it wasn't too late for me to do something bold. Something mine. I stumbled across an article about a woman in Oregon who started a candle business from her kitchen at 70. Another about a retired man who turned his love for gardening into a thriving landscaping company. There were stories out there. Women like me who weren't done just because the world said they were. And I thought, why not me? Now, before I tell you what business I started, you need to understand something else. I've always loved quilting. My mother taught me when I was 9. It started as something we did on rainy afternoons, but over the years, it became therapy. I made quilts for every baby shower, every wedding, every going-away party. I had stacks of fabric in every color you can imagine. Friends used to joke that I could open a store with my collection alone. But no one ever suggested I actually do, and not until that night. The next morning, I pulled out my sewing machine and began working on a quilt. Not for a baby, not for a gift, but for sale. I listed it on Etsy under the name Patchwork Grace. It didn't sell for 2 weeks, but I didn't care. It felt like I had planted something new inside myself, and I was determined to watch it grow. Meanwhile, the kids didn't even realize they had missed anything. Not until Melissa called 2 days later to ask if I could watch her twins over the weekend. I thought you were busy Friday, I said casually. Huh? Oh yeah, we had a thing. I forget what it was. Sorry, Mom. That was all she said. Sorry, Mom. But I had already moved on. Not in a bitter way, just in a forward-facing way. Over the next month, I quilted every day. I learned how to photograph. My work, set prices, ship orders. I stayed up late watching YouTube tutorials on how to grow a small online store. I even designed little handwritten notes to include in each package. And slowly, the orders came in. At first, just 1 or 2 a week, then 5, then a dozen. A woman from Vermont ordered 3 in one go for her daughters. Another customer left a review saying, "My mother passed recently, and this quilt reminds me of her." Hugs. I cried when I read that, because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I wasn't just someone's mom or grandma. I was Linda, an artist, a businesswoman, a woman who turned an empty house and a forgotten party into a new beginning. Of course, my kids started noticing eventually, but I'll save that for the next part of the story. At first, I didn't think much of it. When Jordan stopped by one Saturday afternoon, unannounced, I was still in my pajamas, surrounded by fabric scraps and packing materials. My kitchen table had transformed into a workspace. Quilts in, progress draped over chairs, my laptop open to shipping labels. I looked up at him, surprised. "You okay?" I asked. He scanned the room slowly. "Yeah, just thought I'd drop by. Check in on you." That alone was unusual. Jordan didn't drop by. He was a planner. Everything scheduled on a calendar, even holidays. "Well, as you can see," I chuckled, nervously brushing thread off my lap. "I'm alive and knee-deep in orders." He raised an eyebrow. "You're still doing that quilting thing?" "That quilting thing is actually doing really well," I replied, smiling. He nodded, but something about the way he looked at the boxes, almost like they were out of place, made my smile falter. "Huh, interesting. Well, keep it up, I guess," he said with a strange tone. Then he added, "Do you need help with anything? Finances? Groceries?" I blinked. "No, I'm fine. Why?" He shrugged. "Just making sure. You've been kinda quiet in the group chat." That was the first time I felt it. A shift. Like the air had changed. Just a little. Like someone was asking about something, but not really asking. I brushed it off. But it wasn't the last time. A week later, Melissa came by. This time she had the twins in tow. I welcomed them in, warmed up a casserole, and let the kids play in the living room while I showed her the newest quilt I was working on. She looked at it and smiled, but there was something tight in her eyes. Like the smile didn't quite match the expression. "You've really gone all in on this, huh?" she said. I nodded. "It gives me purpose, and it's been fun. Actually, I've had customers from 13 different states now." She gave a little laugh. "That's great, Mom. Just don't overdo it. You're supposed to be enjoying retirement, remember?" There was something in her voice, not mockery exactly, but something faintly condescending. Like I was playing dress up. Like this was a phase I'd eventually grow bored of. That night, after they left, I noticed something odd. My office door was cracked open. I always kept it closed, especially when I was working on orders. Not locked, I didn't feel the need, but definitely closed. Inside were stacks of customer info, receipts, inventory lists. I stepped inside. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but the chair was pulled out slightly, and one of my notebooks had a page folded back. I hadn't done that. Maybe Melissa was just curious, I thought. Maybe she peeked in and forgot to shut the door. Still, I found myself locking it the next day, just in case. It was around that time that the tone of our group chat started shifting too. Little comments. Ryan asked, "Do you need help managing your taxes? Running a business is a lot at your age." Melissa sent a link to a fun retirement group on Facebook. "You might like this more than Etsy Stress." They weren't mean, but they weren't encouraging either. And then came the strangest moment of all. One evening, Jordan came over with his wife Clara for dinner. I hadn't seen Clara in months. She was always polite, but distant, the kind of woman who gave side hugs and rarely made eye contact. That night, she was unusually warm, talkative even. "You know, Linda," she said while sipping wine, "I think it's wonderful that you've found something you love. Not everyone thrives after retirement." "Thank you," I said, surprised. "But don't you ever worry," she added suddenly, "about making mistakes, overcommitting? I mean, with age, sometimes judgment isn't what it used to be." The room went quiet. Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Clara, no, I'm just saying," she said quickly. "A lot of older people get taken advantage of online. Scams, fraud, it's a real thing." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "I know how to run a business. I've done my research. Of course, she smiled thinly. I'm just looking out for you. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The careful way Clara said older people. The way Jordan looked like he wanted her to stop, but didn't. And the strangest part? That same night, after they left, I noticed the little blinking light on my Wi-Fi router, the one that meant someone was connected to the network. I lived alone. My laptop was off, my phone was charging, but someone had been online. The next morning, I changed the Wi-Fi password. Still, the doubts began to creep in. Am I imagining all this? Was I being paranoid? Or were they really watching me? I started to notice other things. One afternoon, I found Ryan in my garage. I had stepped out to grab the mail and saw the door open from the side. "Hey," I called out. He turned, startled. "Oh, Mom, sorry. I thought I heard a noise." "In the garage?" I asked. He gave an awkward laugh. "Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." But my toolbox was moved. One of the storage bins I used to keep packaging supplies had been unzipped. I didn't say anything. But that night, I moved all my receipts and important documents to a lockbox under my bed, and I began writing things down. Every visit, every strange moment, every comment, just in case I ever needed to remind myself that I wasn't losing it. Because deep down, a quiet voice was starting to whisper something I didn't want to hear. They don't trust me. They think I'm losing it. And maybe they want to take control before I notice. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I was being overly sensitive, or finally seeing things clearly for the first time. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished packaging a quilt order when the power flickered. The storm outside wasn't strong, just gloomy. The kind of Utah rain that sits on the roof like a weight, heavy and slow. I went to reboot my Wi-Fi router when I noticed it again, that little blinking light, even though no device in the house was on. That's when I paused. I had changed the password 2 weeks ago, and never shared it. A chill rolled up my spine. I logged into the router settings, and that's when I saw it. An unfamiliar device was connected, something labeled Nest Hub. I didn't own a Nest device. I stared at the screen. My heart started pounding. I clicked through the device logs. This Nest Hub had been online daily, sometimes during the night, sometimes while I was in the shower. But always, when I wasn't looking. That's when it hit me. There's a camera somewhere in this house. I stood up so fast I knocked over my chair. The next few minutes were a blur. Me walking room to room, scanning the walls, ceiling corners, even under tables. Nothing obvious. But the thought wouldn't leave me. I remembered something Melissa said once, jokingly, during a visit. These smart homes are everywhere now. You can keep an eye on everything remotely. At the time, I'd laughed. Now it didn't feel funny at all. In the hallway near the laundry room, I noticed the air vent cover looked slightly askew. I'd cleaned that vent a dozen times before. It had always been flush with the wall. I pulled a step stool over and climbed up. My fingers gripped the edge of the vent, and I tugged gently. It popped open far too easily. Inside, tucked behind, the slats, was a small black device no larger than a bar of soap. A tiny lens on the front. Wires trailing into the wall. A camera. My throat tightened. I climbed down slowly, holding the vent cover like it might shatter in my hands. I didn't know how long I stood there staring at the wall. My ears were ringing. I felt cold, and yet my hands were sweating. Who put it there? Why? I couldn't breathe. I locked every door, closed every curtain. Then I sat down and opened my laptop. I began searching how to trace hidden smart devices on Wi-Fi. Within minutes, I had a list of MAC addresses, model names, and even approximate IP locations. And then it hit me even harder. There wasn't just one camera. There were 3. One in the hallway vent, one behind a decorative frame in the living room, the only one I didn't hang myself. It was a gift. From Jordan. And one, the worst of them, was embedded in the ceiling smoke detector in my bedroom, my sanctuary, my private space. I nearly threw up. I rushed to the bedroom and yanked the smoke detector down. It wasn't a real one. The casing was fake. Inside, another small lens, carefully angled down over the bed. I sat on the floor, holding it, shaking. Betrayal doesn't feel like you imagine. It's not a scream. It's not even a sob. It's a silence that falls over your whole body, a hollow kind of quiet. I thought about every night I had undressed, every moment I had cried alone. Every phone call I thought was private, and someone had been watching, someone I loved, someone I raised. It was too sophisticated for amateurs. These cameras were synced remotely, through a shared family email address used years ago to set up a photo album. I'd long forgotten the password, but apparently they hadn't. I called a local tech expert, a man named Darren who helped seniors with smart home setups. I didn't tell him the full story, only that I suspected unauthorized access to my Wi-Fi and needed everything scanned. He came the next day. Within an hour, he confirmed it. Someone had remote access through a family-synced Nest account. The footage was likely being uploaded to cloud storage. He looked pale when he realized what I'd found. "Ms. Hill," he said, hesitating. "This kind of thing, it's not legal, and it's definitely not okay." I nodded. My mouth was dry. Can it be traced? Possibly. If the Nest account is linked to someone you know, it should be. I opened my old Gmail. The recovery email for the Nest Hub account, the one managing all the devices, was under Melissa's name. My daughter. The same daughter who had told me not to stress, not to overdo it. Who brought over casserole. Who let her twins play on the carpet while cameras watched us from above. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb. The following evening, I invited them all over. Jordan, Melissa, Ryan, told them I had something exciting to share about the business. They came with smiles and wine. Melissa even brought cookies. I watched their faces as I talked casually about the Etsy shop, my new quilt patterns, the increasing sales. Then, I handed each of them a folder. Inside was a printed screenshot of the Wi-Fi logs, device names, timestamps, MAC addresses, Nest account names. And on the final page, photos of the 3 hidden cameras I had removed, side by side. No one spoke. Jordan was the first to break the silence. "What is this?" "You tell me," I said quietly. Ryan looked at Melissa. Melissa's face turned pale. "Mom, it's not what you think." "No," I said, "because I think you've been spying on me." "For weeks. Maybe months." Jordan stood up. "We were concerned. You've been acting differently, isolated, obsessive about this business. So your solution was to put surveillance in my bedroom?" My voice cracked on the last word. Melissa started crying. "I didn't mean... We just wanted to make sure you weren't being taken advantage of. You wouldn't let us help. Because I never needed help," I said, louder than I meant to. "I needed support, not surveillance." Ryan muttered something about mental health. I shot him a look. "You all forgot my retirement party," I said. "You didn't even ask how I felt. So I found purpose. I found joy again. And instead of cheering me on, you put cameras in my vents." There was nothing left to say. I told them to leave. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just closed, the door behind them. Then I stood alone in my living room. The same living room where they had sat with me, laughed, pretended. I walked to the cabinet and pulled out every single framed photo of the family. One by one, I placed them in a box. Then I changed every password, closed the shared Gmail, deleted old cloud folders, rewired the router, bought a new smoke detector, a real one this time. I wasn't just reclaiming my home, I was reclaiming myself. The night after they left, the silence in the house felt different. Not peaceful, empty. I sat on the couch, holding a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. It echoed like a countdown. This wasn't just about cameras. It wasn't just about spying. It was about trust and love, and how quietly those things can rot when no one tends to them. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where the fake smoke detector used to be. Every shadow felt like a watcher. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. When the sun finally broke through the clouds the next morning, I pulled myself out of bed and opened my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe some trace of when it all began. Maybe proof that I hadn't imagined how deep this ran. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed Nest activity logs. It was tedious. Dry timestamps, device IDs, but buried in it all, a pattern began to form. Most of the activity aligned with times I was alone. And the footage uploads? Always during family group calls, while I was distracted. It was careful, coordinated. There were gaps too. Hours of silence during which I assumed I had privacy. Those gaps coincided with visits. Days Melissa stopped by to check in. Days Jordan dropped off his laundry. They'd been covering their tracks, downloading the files in person, deleting the local traces. I felt sick again. Not from the surveillance, but from the realization. They had thought this through. Not a momentary lapse in judgment. Not a single wrong move. This was planned. That's when something inside me shifted. I'd been humiliated, betrayed, treated like a child in my own home. But I was done crying over it. I was a mother, yes, a grandmother, a widow. But before all that, I was a woman who once ran budgets for a department of 30 people. I managed schedules, conflicts, union policies. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't fragile, and I wasn't going to let this define me. I opened a new document and began writing everything I knew. Every piece of evidence, every login trail, every file I could save. Screenshots, logs, photos of the cameras, names of accounts. I created folders, labeled each one by date. By lunchtime, I had a 72-page digital archive. That night, I sent one message to a woman named Joan Simmons. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years. She was a former coworker, my HR partner, sharp as nails. Honest, too, the bone, and now working for a nonprofit that helped older adults with tech abuse and digital privacy. I didn't know if she'd reply. She called within 10 minutes. Anne? Her voice sounded shocked. I was just thinking about you. I laughed. It came out broken. I wish it was a social call. We talked for an hour. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, just listened. Occasionally I heard her typing. When I finished, she sighed. You're not alone, Anne. This kind of surveillance is more common than people think, especially when older adults regain independence. Kids feel entitled. They justify it as concern, but it's control. And it's dangerous. I felt validated for the first time. I want to do something, I said. Not revenge, but I don't want to just sweep this under the rug. You shouldn't, she said. Start with documentation, which you already have. Next file, a report. I'll connect you with a digital rights attorney. If this went across state lines or involved any stored footage, you have a case. I wasn't sure I wanted to sue my children. That word, lawsuit, felt like a final wall between us. But I wanted protection, and I wanted accountability. Joan also suggested I meet with a family counselor, not to patch things up, but to prepare for the confrontation if it ever came again. Boundaries, she said, needed to be reinforced. Not negotiated, so the next morning I made another call to a woman named Lena, a therapist who specialized in family estrangement. I sat in her office 2 days later, clutching a USB drive filled with logs and photos. She looked at me kindly. "What are you hoping to gain from this, Anne?" I didn't have a clear answer. "Peace," I said finally. "Control over my life. And maybe closure." She nodded. "Then we'll work toward that, on your terms." We talked through the trauma, not just the cameras, but the years leading up to it, the subtle dismissals, the constant second-guessing of my choices, how easily concern had masked condescension. "They treated you like a liability," Lena said, "instead of an adult." Those words echoed in my chest. It wasn't just about the retirement party. It wasn't even just about the cameras. It was about how I had disappeared in their eyes. Slowly, quietly. The quilts, the online shop, the community I had built. They weren't just hobbies. They were me clawing back visibility. By the end of our session, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Steady, capable, in control. When I got home, I began another plan. I created a spreadsheet titled Next Chapter. In it, I listed local business expos, small batch manufacturing services, and possible hiring options for shipping help. My Etsy shop was thriving. Orders were doubling monthly. It was no longer just a side gig. It could be my legacy. I also began organizing a workshop series, something I could teach at the local community center. Modern quilting for independent women. Not just a skill class, a statement. I printed flyers, designed a logo, and posted in 3 Facebook groups. By that weekend, I had 14 signups. Every thread I had lost, every thread they tried to snip with surveillance and suspicion. I was weaving back together, one stitch at a time. It happened on a Sunday. The sky was clear. The kind of spring day when everything smells like new beginnings. Fresh grass, warm breeze, distant bark of neighborhood dogs. I invited them for lunch. Melissa, Jordan, their spouses, the kids. No. Hints. No warning. Just a message in the family group chat. "Lunch at my place this Sunday. I'm making roast and apple pie. Hope to see you." They all came. Of course they did. Melissa brought wine. Jordan carried a Bluetooth speaker. The kids ran through the hallway like they owned the place. Laughter filled the rooms, clashing with the silence that had lived there weeks before. No one asked why I invited them. No one mentioned the cameras. They just smiled. A little too wide. Sat. A little too straight. I waited until the plates were scraped clean, until the coffee was poured, until my granddaughter Lily climbed onto my lap with sticky fingers and leaned her head on my shoulder. Then I gently placed her beside me and stood. "I want to show you something," I said. The smiles tightened, eyebrows lifted. Melissa glanced at Jordan. I walked over to the TV, plugged in a USB drive, and clicked play. The screen lit up with a time-stamped video, grainy footage from a Nest camera. There I was, standing in the kitchen, singing softly, to myself as I poured tea. Behind me, the living room. Empty. The audio picked up faint footsteps. Then, Melissa's voice. "She still doesn't know?" Jordan. "Nope. Just keep clearing it when you visit. She doesn't check the logs." Melissa. "I still say we just talk to her. You know how she gets with her sewing obsession." Jordan. And what? Let her blow the inheritance on yarn and cat toys? The room froze. Not a sound. On screen, I was still humming, oblivious, smiling. I paused the video. My voice was calm. I found 7 hidden cameras, 2 motion-activated microphones, logins traced to your IPs, hundreds of downloads. And the name of the Nest account? Mom Monitor. I turned to them. You really didn't think I'd figure it out? Jordan's mouth opened, then closed. Again. Melissa stood slowly, her cheeks blotchy. Mom, she started. We were trying to protect you. From what? My voice cracked, not with weakness, but the restraint it took to stay composed. From myself, from freedom, from turning 72 with a functioning brain. It wasn't like that, Jordan said quickly. You just changed. After Dad passed, you started sewing constantly, isolating. You sold the house. I sold the house because none of you wanted to help me maintain it. You refused to move in with any of us, Melissa added. You said you needed space. But what if something happened to you while you were alone? I stepped forward. If you were truly worried, you could have talked to me, not spied on me, not mocked me behind my back. Melissa's voice sharpened. We were not mocking. I hit play again. A new clip. Melissa to Jordan. Ugh, I swear. If I hear one more story about her online quilt club, I'm going to scream. She thinks she's some kind of influencer. Then laughter. My hand shook as I paused the video again. You didn't just monitor me, I said. You judged me, belittled me, in my home. Silence. Finally, Jordan stood. Okay, you're right. It was wrong. It was, I guess we thought we were being smart. Careful. We didn't want you to get hurt or spend your inheritance, I snapped. Say it. His face fell. That's not fair. No, I said, more to myself than anyone. What's not fair is being reduced to a liability by the people I raised. What's not fair is watching your children treat you like a senile project. Melissa sank into her chair, arms folded tight. I wanted to trust you, I said. I really did. The kids were quiet now. Even they could feel the shift. Then I reached into the folder on the table and pulled out 3 documents. This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. I don't want any of you accessing anything that belongs to me. No emails, no logins, no home visits unless invited. Violate this, and you'll be hearing from her directly. Their jaws dropped. Jordan reached for the paper. I pulled it back. You'll each get your own copy by mail, along with a formal record of the digital rights complaint I've filed. Melissa stood up abruptly. So that's it? You're just cutting us off? No, I said. I'm drawing boundaries. You're free to be in my life if you respect them. If not, then yes, I'm cutting off the parts that rot. Jordan looked pale. Mom, this feels like war. It's not war, I replied softly. It's liberation. I turned to the children, all of them frozen, confused. Go get your shoes, I said gently. It's time to go. None of the adults moved, but the kids obeyed, slowly, quietly, like they sensed something sacred was happening. 10 minutes later, the house was empty again. I walked through the hallway, past the empty plates, the wrinkled napkins, the vase of flowers Melissa had brought, untouched. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Power, not loud, not vengeful, just solid. My voice had been heard. My truth had been laid bare. And for the first time, I wasn't shrinking in shame or confusion. I had stood my ground. And no one, not even my own blood, could take that away. The next morning, I opened every window in the house. Not because it was stuffy, or because I needed air, but because I wanted every room to feel what I felt. Freedom. It didn't happen all at once. Healing rarely does. But something had shifted the night before. Something inside me had untangled and stood up straight. I didn't wait for another apology. I didn't sit by the phone hoping they'd call with regret in their voices. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, and wrote one sentence. This is where I begin again. The first thing I did was pack, not frantically, not the way people leave after fights or breakups. No, this was different, deliberate. I placed each thing into boxes with purpose. My fabrics, my sketchbooks, my mother's tea set. Not because I was running, but because I was choosing something better. I'd spent the last few years convincing myself that aging meant shrinking. Shrinking dreams, shrinking space, shrinking voice. But the truth? Getting older just meant I had fewer people to impress, and more reasons to honor myself. I called a real estate agent and put the house on the market the following week. The agent, a kind woman named Holly, asked gently, "Are you sure? You've lived here over 30 years. Yes, I said, smiling. And now it's time someone else gets to. Next, I filed the necessary reports. It wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing the line in the sand. My lawyer helped me file a restraining clause tied to digital access and location data. The cameras and devices had all been removed, but this time there'd be paperwork behind my boundaries. I also removed Jordan as my financial cosigner and transferred all power of attorney documents to a neutral, third party, someone I trusted, outside the family. It was exhausting work. Not physically, but emotionally. The kind of work that forces you to stare at truths you'd rather avoid. But every form I signed, every password I changed, every key I turned over, it felt like peeling off another layer of shame. Then came the part I didn't expect. The lightness. Moved into a modest condo on the edge of Salt Lake City, just far enough from the family that I could breathe, close enough that they could visit if invited. My new place had sunlight that poured into the living room every morning. There was a small balcony where I kept herbs and a rocking chair, and a cozy little room I turned into a sewing studio. Not just for me, but for others too. You see, a few months prior, I'd joined a small online group for senior artisans, women from around the country who shared patterns, told stories, gave feedback. We called ourselves the Stitch Circle. At first, it was just for fun. But then one of them, Greta from Oregon, said, "You should sell these, you know." I laughed it off. But then she messaged again, linking an online shop platform and offering to help me set one up. And that's how Patch and Purpose was born. A little shop, a little spark, a big, bold second act. I made quilts with themes, stories sewn into them. Some about healing, some about loss, some funny, some weepy. I even made one called Mom Monitor, a satire piece, full of pixel motifs, security camera icons, and eyes with eyelashes. It sold within 48 hours. I sent a photo of it to Melissa with no message attached. A week later, she texted, "That was cruel, but also kind of brilliant." I didn't respond. Not out of malice, out of peace. One evening, while sipping tea on my balcony, a neighbor, an older man with gentle eyes and a habit of humming Patsy Cline, stopped by. "I hear you're the quilt lady," he said with a crooked smile. "I suppose I am," I replied. He asked if I'd ever make one for a veteran, for his brother, who'd passed recently. I said yes. He came by the next day with stories, patches, and a photo of his brother in uniform. We sat in silence as I sewed. Not sad silence, just shared. That night, I cried a little. Not from grief. From grace. From the joy of realizing that I wasn't just reclaiming my life, I was weaving pieces of others' lives into art, into meaning. It's funny. All those years I spent thinking I needed my family to validate me. And here I was, validating myself with every stitch, every order, every story told through thread. Jordan still sends emails sometimes. Melissa sent a card last month. It said, "I didn't know how much I took your freedom for granted. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I placed it in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember that healing doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes it just means softening. The kids haven't visited in a while, and that's okay. One day, they might come knocking with real questions and open hearts. Until then, I have a business to run, herbs to water, and a quilt to finish. This chapter of my life didn't start with a grand plan. It started with betrayal, and it turned into a blessing. Sometimes the road to yourself runs through heartache, but on the other side, there's room to breathe, room to begin again. I wake up to sunlight now, real sunlight. Not the blue glare of security cameras or the glow of silent judgment. Just honest morning light spilling across my quilted bedspread. The windows cracked open a bit. I like to hear the breeze before I open my eyes. It rustles the lavender on my balcony and smells faintly of pine and bread from the bakery down the street. This is what waking up should feel like. Not dread, not performance. Just peace. I make my coffee with cinnamon now. It's something I picked up from one of the women in the Stitch Circle, Carmen from New Mexico. She said it warms the heart. And somehow it really does. I don't rush anymore. My mornings are quiet rituals. Hot mug in hand, soft jazz playing on the record player, the hum of the sewing machine waiting like an old friend. My condo is small, but it wraps around me like a favorite sweater. There's a blue wall in the living room where I hang finished quilts before packaging them. Each one has a story stitched into it, not just thread, but a timeline of healing. There's one called Uninvited Birthday, with tiny party hats stitched upside down. Another called Grown Daughter Missing Mother. That one sold before I even finished binding the edges. Customers often write messages when they place an order. My mom passed 2 years ago. Your work reminds me of her. I bought this for my daughter. We don't talk much, but I want her to know I still care. Quilts are strange that way. They hold people, not just warmth, but memory. And every time I finish one, I feel like I've stitched a piece of myself back together too. There's a local bookstore that hosts community events once a month. They reached out after seeing Patch and Purpose online and asked if I'd like to teach a storytelling quilting class. At first, I laughed. Then I paused. Then I said yes. The first class was terrifying. 10 people, a big circle of folding chairs and a table full of mismatched fabric. But once I started talking about stitches, memory, layers, they leaned in. One woman cried when she described sewing a patch of her late father's flannel shirt. A teenager stitched a small symbol for her autism journey, a puzzle piece, with gold thread. It wasn't just about sewing, it was about belonging. We meet every Thursday now. We call it Mend, because that's what we're all doing in some way. I've started writing again too. Not for anyone else, just for me. Little essays, memories, thoughts about aging, family, freedom. One morning I wrote, I thought I was disposable. Turns out, I was just undiscovered. That sentence made me cry, but it also made me laugh. Who knew? After all these years of mothering, caretaking, sacrificing, I still had something brand new to become. Sometimes Jordan texts me. Short things. Hey, hope you're good. Once he sent an old photo of us fishing when he was 10. Don't always reply. But when I do, I keep it simple, polite, clear. Boundaries are part of love now. Melissa called on Mother's Day. She didn't ask to visit, just wanted to say she remembered me. that she'd been thinking. Her voice cracked once. Mine didn't. That was a first. I don't miss the old house. I thought I would. The creaky floors, the back garden, the hallway full of family photos. But what I realized is, walls don't hold legacy. People do, and I'm still here. So the story isn't over. My body is softer now. My hair is whiter. But my laughter, it's louder than it's been in years. And the best part? I don't owe that joy to anyone. Not a husband, not a child, not a holiday dinner where no one shows up. I gave it to myself. The other day, I stitched a little patch with my initials and the year. I sewed it into the corner of a baby quilt for a woman who just aged out of the foster system. She wrote, "I've never had anything handmade before." I cried. But this time, it wasn't grief. It was legacy. Real legacy. Not just money. Not just name. But warmth. Safety. A hug that arrives in the mail. And you know what? I threw myself a birthday party last month. Not to make up for the forgotten retirement party. That chapter is closed. But just because I wanted to celebrate, I invited neighbors, bookshop friends, the women from Mend. We had lemonade, finger sandwiches, and a cake shaped like a sewing machine. Someone played the ukulele, someone else read a poem. And as the sun set over the Utah mountains, someone raised a glass and said, "To the woman who taught us that it's never too late to start again." And in that moment, surrounded by people I hadn't known a year ago, but who now knew me, I felt it in my bones. This was not the ending of a sad story. This was the beginning of a real one, a life stitched together with purpose, soft but strong, colorful, and finally, mine. You know, I used to believe that loyalty meant staying silent, that if you loved someone, a child, a spouse, even a memory, you swallowed your questions, your pain, your doubts. But I've learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's control wrapped in sentiment. Guilt dressed as tradition. And when I finally stepped away from that, when I chose myself over their comfort, I didn't lose a family. I found me. There is grief in letting go, yes. But there's also clarity. And in that clarity, a whole new life waited patiently, like a porch light left on just for me. Sometimes the ones who claim to love us the most are the ones who try to control us. But freedom, once taken back, is the most beautiful kind of peace. It doesn't always look like fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it's cinnamon in your coffee, a door that locks from the inside, a laugh that surprises even you because you forgot how light you could feel. I'm not the woman they underestimated anymore. I'm not invisible. I'm not disposable. And I'm not afraid. Because the truth is, I didn't start over at 68. I just started telling the truth. To them. To the world. And finally, to myself, if you discovered someone watching your every move, what would you do? Would you stay quiet? Would you doubt your instincts? Or would you walk out into the unknown and start a new life with your name stitched boldly across it? Because here's what I know now. It's never too late to begin again. Not at 30. Not at 60. Not even after everyone forgets your retirement party, especially then.